Xinyi Zhou, graduate student at computer science at Syracuse University. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Hi, Ben. Great to see you, and thanks for having me.
So I have you here today, Xinyi, because you and your
Mhm.
advisor, Reza Zafarani, wrote this great paper, A Survey of Fake News, Fundamental Theories, Detection Methods, and Opportunities, which I will link to in the notes to this podcast. Um, so, first, a couple of general questions. What is fake news in the context of your paper, and why did you decide to write a survey paper about it?
So speaking of what is fake news, it sounds like a very easy to answer question, but it's a tough one. So actually, there's no universal definition for fake news this term. We got this conclusion after searching and reading related studies, not just in computer science, but also in social science. Uh, this term has been used in a number of scenarios defined in different ways. So, for example, sometimes it is a news articles that is intentionally and verifiably false, or uh, or sometimes it refers to any false information. Sometimes it includes satire news, but sometimes it doesn't. So to summarize those definitions from a higher level by focusing more on their main ideas, but less than expressions or the selected words they used, we found out the similarity and the difference among current definitions can mostly refer to three attributes. So the first, so the first one is veracity or authenticity. So most current studies, they agree that fake news should carry false and non-factual information. So it is definitely a misuse if you just call something you don't like, but objectively exists as fake news. The second attribute is intention, the referring to the purpose of writing or creating the false information. Uh, so the falsity within the information can be created the first unintentionally, like some spelling mistakes, or you didn't just realize some knowledge has been out of date. It can be used for fun, like satire news, or can be created on purpose to mislead the public for example, for some political manipulation purpose. And current definitions of fake news haven't made an agreement on this, and neither on defining the news itself, which is our last attribute. So sometimes the news within fake news, they broadly refer to any claims, but sometimes it specifically represents news articles published by news outlets such as The Economist. Uh, and now, speaking of what fake news indicate to myself or to our team, I for myself, I don't think there's any definition correct or incorrect as long as it has a clear stance. So that's why in our survey, we instead of providing a specific definition, we provide a broad and narrow definition regarding the fake news. So in the broad definition, fake news is just false news, where the news includes articles, claims, statements, speeches, and posts. Here we accept Wardo's opinion in her article entitled if I remember correctly, is fake news. It's complicated. He mentioned that fake news should about more than news, and should about the entire information ecosystem. Uh, and and in this definition, we didn't consider intention attribute for the sake of fake news research in computer science, for the sake of its automatic detection by developing methods such as using artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, and so on. Within a computer science scenario, considering intention itself would bring a huge challenge in obtaining the ground truth data. So basically, this broad definition of fake news imposes a minimum requirement, the minimum constraint, in accord with the current resources. This can support most of the existing fake news data and allow us to connect the ground truth data from the fact-checking websites. So that's a broad definition. And speaking of the narrow definition, we define fake news as the intentionally false news published by a news outlet. We believe this kind of information has most detrimental impact on the society since it's less distinguishable than incautious fake news. Because the creators will do their best to convince you to believe what is said.
So, Xinyi,
Yeah.
in your paper,
Mm-hmm.
so the focus, as I maybe I'm mistaken here, but you folks focused on text-based fake news, correct? Or
Test,
did you
yes,
make?
but we also include some multimodal fake news detection.
I see, I see.
Mm-hmm.
And all right, so then so now we have some sort of definition, right? So as you said the broad definition is fake news is false news, and then the
Yeah, correct.
narrow definition is fake news is intentionally false news
False news. Yeah.
published by a news outlet.
Mm.
Um, so now that we have a definition, let's look at how people have studied fake news, or in particular how they detect fake news. So in your
Sure.
paper, you and your advisor listed 3 or 4 ways, right? So the first one, so let's go through them systematically. So the first one you define as knowledge-based methods.
Yes, correct. Knowledge-based methods. This group of methods, they detect the fake news by verifying if the knowledge within the news content, the to be verified news content, is consistent with facts, or we can say the true knowledge. The knowledge
But
here.
by the way, Yassine,
Uh-huh.
before you proceed, I forgot to ask you this question, which
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
which you proceed the techniques. So generally, what is the data set for fake news? So for example, Sinyi, in
Mm,
computer vision, you have ImageNet, right?
yes.
So
Yes.
in language and speech, you have things like Glue. So is there
Mm-hmm.
like an accepted data set for fake news?
Sorry, can you repeat again? My
So
internet is kind
so
of
so
unstable.
so is there a data set that researchers who study fake news agree on, that this will be the data set they use to benchmark their work?
Uh, I think there have been a number of fake news data set. So some of them they focus on the news content itself. Uh, I remember there's a data set called code sorry, I forgot the name. It's
Yeah,
NEGT something. Yeah, so it connects the full news articles from different resources,
I see.
and some just contain some short claims and statements from, for example, the PolitiFact fact check website, like the liar dataset. The name is liar, and also some other datasets focus on the news content. They are favor datasets. Um, and I think in particularly in those recent years, researchers start to realize the importance of social media data, which means on social media we can have a bunch of how those news spreads on social media, and how we can effectively mitigate or intervene in its spreading. So with this concern, a bunch of fake news datasets uh, further involving the propagation data has emerged. For example, one typical example is connected by the ASU researchers. It's called Fake News Net. And with a specific application of combating COVID-19 infodemic. So our lab ourselves recently also just released a COVID-19 data set for news credibility research.
And so generally, in your paper, most of the studies you reviewed, they're mostly concerned with English fake news. Is that correct?
Yes, but we also like try to extend our, because for example, I'm come from China, so I'm familiar with Chinese. I also want to propose some models can cross languages. I think which will be pretty valuable.
Yeah, because so our listeners probably know fake news is a worldwide problem, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So sorry, but now let's go back to
Yeah, sure.
knowledge-based methods. I think at a high level,
Mhm.
you are dealing with a knowledge base of some kind, or or
Uh,
or 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 a like a site like PolitiFact or Snopes, right?
Uh, yes, in our survey, we compare those some of the famous fact-checking websites to compare their, for example, their labels provided, or if they contain the full articles or just the short claims and statements, or like videos, those kind of information. So we have a table to comprehensively compare those kind of fact check websites.
So, couple of questions here, Xinyi. First of
Mm,
all, the world is changing constantly, so
yes,
facts change all the time. I guess not facts, but there's new facts that get introduced all the
yeah.
time. So how practical are these methods if the knowledge base or the website doesn't get updated that often?
That's actually a great question, because in our survey paper, we mentioned that knowledge-based fake news detection have some open issues, and how to handle the fact out of date is one of them. So unfortunately, as far as I know, there's not many uh, techniques or tools have considered this problem or addressed it.
So how generally how do these knowledge bases and fact checking websites work? Are they maintained by experts? Is it crowdsourced? Because crowdsourced can be also gamed, right?
Yeah, I think most of the fact check website in the current time uh, is the new the news articles are verified by trained journalists or experienced editors, but a few crowdsourced platforms have emerged to fact check in the crowdsourcing way.
And then the second set of methods are what you call style-based methods, but
Yes,
basically at a high level, as I understand it, at at some point you build some sort of classifier. It could be using a traditional machine learning model like XGBoost or Random Forest, or maybe
yes.
even using deep learning models. Um, but then basically the idea here is you try to classify an article as to whether or not it's likely to be uh, contain fake information. Is that correct?
Yes. So basically, it tried to capture the writing style of the within the news content. But for deep learning, it's like what we usually say is we try to learn the content representation. instead of compared to the knowledge based, we just try to extract the bunch of knowledge and compare them. One thing good for style based is we think style based is a possible way to identify the intention of news authors or creators, because social science theorists told us, okay, if people write something or tell a lie, want to intentionally mislead other people, so there will be some difference in his writing styles compared to when he's telling the truth.
So at some point, Xinyi, do you think there's going to be an arms? I guess there's always an arms race, right, between the people who are creating fake news and the people who are detecting fake news. Um, so at some point, the people creating fake news will also use machine learning to create fake news.
Yeah, it's possible. For example, they can create a bunch of social bots account, and some researchers are working on how to detect those social bots, and then those malicious entities will evolve to resist the attack from those detection algorithms. So it's kind of like a mouse and cat running game.
So of the first two techniques we discussed, the first one, knowledge based, which involves a knowledge base or a fact checking website. The second one is
Mhm.
uh, more akin to machine learning. So you're trying to use
Yes,
machine learning to detect writing styles. Um,
yes, and
so
actually we have to work within this part.
right. So of the first two, I think the audience is probably more familiar than with the first one, right? Because the fact checking. So the second one, the style based, are people actually using this method
You mean using like in practice
in practice? Yeah,
or
not just
yeah.
for research.
Mm, I think one problem, I don't know too much about like how those detecting methods used in practice or in engineering, but I think one problem uh, to make it difficult to make it to put the methods into the practice is because fake news, for example, when the news coming into like online or social media, so those news are often have new information or news even, but machine learning mostly are familiar with the trend data, which means the previous events or the previous knowledge. So in this case, probably it brings some difficulties to bring those methods into the practice.
So the style-based method, you will also need to create labeled data, right?
Yes, true. We need
Yeah,
to counting on domain experts.
yeah. And then I guess it's one of these things that if people if you share too much detail about your model, then
Mhm.
the people creating the fake news will obviously try to
Yeah,
create
yeah, they
workaround.
will learn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, so the next way to detect fake news is uh, after they've already been created and they've been published. So these are propagation based fake news detection.
Yeah,
So
yes.
give us a high level description of these methods.
So generally speaking, those propagation-based methods, they investigate how news spreads on social media. Such propagation here is mainly described using news cascades, a tree structure that captures the news tweets and the retweet relationship. But it can be described as well using some other, for example, the network formed by, for example, the spreaders social connections, which is one of our work, or user stances, or some other relationships. And those network can be, for example, the homogeneous, heterogeneous, and the hierarchical. So once a network has been determined, the detecting methods can be very flexible and diverse. For example, you can use feature engineering within a statistical learning framework, or you can use a graph neural network method, or you can design graph optimization algorithms. So our survey has made a detailed
And,
description for each of the methods. Okay, go ahead.
and generally, I
Mhm.
think several studies have shown that fake news spreads faster than real news, right?
Yes, that's a discovery published on Science 2017.
And so this particular class of methods, the propagation-based methods, this is where you probably start encountering bots, correct?
Start to countering bots, you mean?
Bots are a way for fake news to get propagated, right?
I think in that studies, the bots, I didn't remember the detail, but I didn't remember like if the study firstly filter a bunch of social bots or not, or just generally consider all the, for example, the how many spreaders for each news, how many times it has been spreaded, those kind of information. But it doesn't like specifically say, okay, so among all the spreaders, how many social bots are in are, for example, spread the fake news or spread the true news.
And then the final class of techniques that you folks describe are source-based detection methods. So describe for us what these are.
So source method is it so it has assumption. So those group of methods they try to use the credibility of news sources to infer the credibility of news itself. And the source here can be defined in multiple ways. For example, it can be the source who write the news article, which means the news authors, or it can be the source who publish the news article, in other words, the news publishers. And then the problem can be converted or can be relevant to web spam detection. And it can also be the source who first share the news on social media. In other words, the news spreaders. And then the problem can be relevant to, for example, the detection of social bots or the internet trolls.
So so these source-based methods basically they look at the credibility of an author or a publisher,
Yes,
but then
and the users.
over time, someone's credibility can change as well, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so I imagine, I guess generally, Xinyi, all of these methods need very fresh data all the time, right? I mean, that's
Yes.
especially true in the knowledge base, but just generally, all of these methods need need constant updating.
Yes, and I think if I have to like give a ranking, I give the first priority to knowledge, and then style, and then propagation and source.
And also, as I was listening to you describe each of these methods, it strikes me that each method has strengths and weaknesses.
Yes,
So then, I think ideally, actually, you would use all of them, right? Like in an ensemble.
yes, yes, because I think each of the perspective has its strengths and weakness. So what we need to do is try to address the open issues within a within a specific perspective and make it more powerful.
So one of the things that I think people have realized is that okay, so we might be able to detect fake news, but by the time we detect it, it's already spread. So I think one of the things
Yeah.
that you cite in your paper is one important research direction is early detection, correct?
Yes, that's a challenge when designing the propagation-based or even source-based methods, because, for example, we know, okay, deep learning models, they often perform very well, but usually it needs large-scale training data. But if we develop a pure propagation-based methods, which means we can only use the propagation information itself. In this case, if we want to, because we definitely we don't want to we don't want to detect the fake news after it has been widely spread or after it has gained the public trust. So which means we want to detect it at the early stage or once the news even jumped in and we can catch it, the fake news even. So the problem is at the early stage. For example, the new knowledge comes and we don't have the similar. For example, this knowledge have not been stored in, for example, knowledge base or in the training data. So we have no idea about those kind of news articles. And sometimes if we just start the spreading, we have very limited information about its spreaders, about the propagation path. Those all things will bring challenges, even negatively impact our detection models.
And then, as you mentioned earlier, there's also, I mean, so you can imagine if someone is really determined, they would use different modalities, right? So they would post something on Twitter, they would write an article on a post it on a website, then they would post a short video on YouTube, post
Yes.
that video on Facebook. So there's many platforms and mediums that someone can use.
Yes. So for multimodal, it can refer to textual information, like news content, or visual information, like some news images. And in our connected data, we also include video information. Um, and broadly speaking, it can also contain some, for example, temporal information, the data information, or the network, the graph information. And like we are actually our recent work, we found like using a single model is often perform worse than using multimodal. And uh, and one thing we need to be noticed. One thing we need to notice is sometimes we instead of just separately consider multiple model information, actually their relationship are also very useful and valuable in improving the performance of predicting fake news.
So one of the things that you talk about in the survey paper is explainable fake news
Mm,
detection, which I think uh, is actually something that most people are aware of because these days when a platform, let's say, does something to flag a piece of content or remove a piece of content, they are usually people who complain and say, "Well, why did you do that? Explain to us why you did that," and so on and so forth, right? So, on the other hand, though, Sydney, I was thinking
mm.
if the detection model is too explainable, then the fraudsters can game the model, right? So it's a
Yes.
there's a balancing act there, right?
Yes, as well the transparency. So we want for example, the company's algorithm. For example, we want the algorithm used on social media can be transparent, but sometimes those kind of transparency might be utilized by malicious entities. So there is also some trade-off, need some balance between them.
It's very similar to search engine optimization. And if you tell people how you do search ranking, then
Yeah, they
people
can
that
manipulate the ranking results.
yeah. So there might be a way to just give broad idea of yes. So we use the following factors, but not explained in too much detail, right?
Yes, and the ideal plan is we can develop some robust system. We can resist those kind of attack from malicious entities.
And
That would be the perfect plan.
yes, yeah. So let's go back to the whole language
Okay.
question. So we went through the different methods of detecting fake news. So knowledge based, style based, propagation based, and source
Mhm.
based. Uh, so which of these methods have a lot of research papers across many languages?
Across languages.
Yeah. So which one is
Um,
the most commonly studied across languages?
in my opinion, I think it's style based because style based can actually connect you to a huge topic is text classification. So in recent years, NLP area has proposed many advanced techniques like transformer, like the famous model BERT.
Right.
So yeah,
The
so those model has been extended for multilinguistics, and I think so that's why I think the style based one, you can find most research on fake news detection across languages.
so what the so which of these areas, Xinyi, are you personally spending most of your time in terms of your own work?
Mine is style based and propagation based. Because style based, the reason I want to focus on because I'm really interested in how to identify the intention. For example, how to detect if this information is intentionally false or not, or like once the user spread this information, if it intentionally spread it or just didn't recognize its falsity. So those kind of problem really attract me.
So these topics are inherently draw from many different disciplines, right? So as you mentioned, natural language
Yes,
processing, uh, machine learning, in the sense of
yes,
the classifiers, but and deep learning because now we have the Sesame Street models, the Elmo, Bert, and so
mm,
on.
yes,
Um, and then I imagine if you start getting into audio or speech, then you're also using deep learning uh,
yes.
at that point. But then also in the propagation based methods, then you're looking at network science techniques, right?
Yes, and social media mining, those kind of stuff.
So in many ways, either you yourself become an expert on all of these different techniques, or the ideal fake news detection team is comprised of people from many different backgrounds, right?
Hmm. But I'm still like learning as much as I can.
Yeah. And so how much generally how big are the how much training data do you need in order to get a good style based detector?
I think depends. For example, if just within a statistical learning framework. So my experience for my work, we our data set can be like kind of large scale. For example, thousands of news. But when referring to deep learning, we like ideally we need as much data as we can connect.
So we talked a lot about detection, but
Mhm.
the other thing that is happening these days is creation, right? So the so-called deepfakes, particularly
Oh
in
yeah, true.
video and audio. But now you can imagine a deepfake for text with something like GPT-3, right?
Mm.
Um, so just as you and your team are developing tools for detecting,
Mhm.
the other side is also not resting, right? So they're also building better tools. The people creating fake news are also improving the tools for creating fake news, right?
Yes, and actually those techniques will make fake news like easy to be produced and less distinguishable. So that's a strong motivation to encourage us propose more advanced fake news detection methods and intervention methods.
So in closing, so we've got a lot of studies in fake news detection in English. So what other languages have a lot of studies? So I imagine Chinese, Spanish, maybe, no?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, because I don't know too much about the other languages.
Yeah,
So my main focus is in English. That's the
English, yeah.
first one, and the second one is Chinese. But speaking of what researches most, I think should be Chinese
Chinese, yeah,
because
yeah.
we have a large population.
But I imagine a lot of the techniques would translate as long as you have data sets, correct?
Yeah, that sounds a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. So most of the tools you're building will probably work in another language if you have the right data set, correct?
Yeah, true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And with that, thank you, Xinyi.
Thank you, Ben. It's so great to talk with you.